Gather around, y'all. I feel it's about time I tell y'all about a railroad folk hero. He was a damn fine man, the pride of Uncle Sam, and his name was Casey Jones. No, not that one, you nerd. Jonathan Luther Casey Jones was an American railroad engineer born in 1863. He grew up with a love of locomotives and eventually got a job working as a brakeman on the Mobile and Ohio Railway. When yellow fever struck the states in 1887, he managed to quickly work his way up to fireman, landing a job firing freight locomotives in 1888 for the Illinois Central Railroad, eventually reaching his lifelong ambition of becoming a driver 3 years later in 1891. He drove freight trains and was known to get her there on the time advertised and never be late. He also had his own personal locomotive whistle made up of 6 thin tubes that sounded something like this. People living close to the railroad came to recognize it as Casey's own trademark. Casey always had a good attitude and frequently joked with his fellow enginemen, leading many to enjoy working with him. If you were on the footplate with Casey, you were in for a good day. After running passenger trains for a short time at the World's Columbian Exhibition in 1893, he became very acquainted with the engine he was driving, number 638. After the event, he requested that he drive the engine back to Water Valley, where it was to operate. Jones liked the engine so much he ended up driving it for most of his railroading career. He was a very eager man, always trying his hardest to land better paying jobs and work his way up to driving passenger trains. Despite being liked by many and held in high regards by peers, Jones was considered a somewhat reckless driver. By 1900, he'd been issued with 9 citations and had been suspended from driving for a total of 145 days. Supposedly though, the penalties for being late were much worse than those for breaking the rules. Despite this, he was also regarded as a hero, as he was always concerned for the safety of others, despite his recklessness. An example of this was when he saved a young girl from being ran over on his way to Michigan City in 1895. He had slowed his engine down so he could walk onto the running board and oil the locomotive while it was still moving. As he was about to return to the cab, he spotted some children dart in front of the train some 60 yards ahead. One girl froze at the sight of the train in the middle of the tracks. Jones called to the other driver to reverse the engine while also calling for the girl to move, seemingly in the same breath. Seeing the imminent trouble, Jones raced to the front of the engine and braced himself on the cowcatcher, reaching out as far as he could to grab the girl and safely move her from the rails. In 1900, Casey was transferred to Memphis, Tennessee, where he worked passenger trains between Memphis and Canton. He had to leave his beloved number 638 back in Water Valley, but was happy with the new engine he drove, number 382, which came to be nicknamed Ole 382 or Cannonball after the service it ran. 382 was fitted with his custom whistle and he drove it for a few months before he ended up dying a hero. I don't quite have all the details, but the story roughly goes like this. On the 29th of April, Casey's train departed from Memphis 75 minutes late. It was a foggy and rainy day, and it wasn't helped that the line was known for having tight and tricky curves. Jones was making up for lost time, managing to gain back 70 minutes before having to wait in a siding for another train to go by. Casey tried to stick to his word of on the advertised time, but he didn't know that 3 separate trains were waiting in the station at Vaughan. The last few wagons of a freight train were sitting on the main line after an air brake broke while shunting to let Casey's train pass. Jones had managed to make up time and was running at roughly 75 miles an hour when he rounded the blind bend into the station. The fireman, Simeon Webb, spotted the wagons and warned Jones. Jones told Sim to jump and quickly sounded his engine's whistle to warn anyone in the caboose of the train ahead. He slammed on the air brakes and put Old 382 in full reverse, but the engine was still going too fast. In the time between applying the brakes and the impact, Casey had slowed his train down from 75 miles an hour to 35. Casey's train plowed straight through the caboose and 3 wagons before coming to a stop. Despite the mess, everyone on board the passenger train survived with little to no injury, and only a few workmen were hurt trying to get out of the way. Only one person died in the accident. Casey Jones. His engine was wrecked and buried in an embankment along with the wreckage of the caboose and 3 other wagons littering the rails. Supposedly, when Jones's body was recovered, it was found still clutching the brake and whistle, with his skull crushed and his right arm torn from its socket. Had Jones also jumped, it would have likely been a much more fatal accident. He was soon transported via railroad to the church he was married in. From there, he was taken and buried in a local cemetery. Around 15 enginemen rode roughly 118 miles from Water Valley to pay their respects. Afterwards, many would visit the scene of the accident to see the imprint in the embankment left by the engine. Corn that was scattered from the broken freight car grew for years in surrounding fields. There's a plaque marking the location of the accident in Memphis. Jones had a wife and kids, was liked by all, and respected everyone, even his fireman on the night of the accident, Simeon T. Webb, who was African American. Since the incident, there have been many references to him in the forms of folk songs and other media, such as the Ballad of Casey Jones. Despite being little more than a folk tale nowadays, the story of Casey Jones is another example that not all heroes wear capes. Some of them drive trains. Subscribe for more.